The desert wind blew hard that evening, carrying grit and the scent of rain. Elias Boone, a hardened rancher with more years on horseback than in town, guided his weary mare down the canyon trail. He was ready for supper and the quiet comfort of his land when he spotted movement in the distance. At first, he thought it was a tumbleweed, but as he drew closer, he saw it was a woman, stumbling, her figure barely upright. Her face was hidden beneath a rough cloth wrapped tightly around her head and shoulders. She moved like someone who had been walking for miles with no rest. Elias dismounted and caught her just as she was about to collapse. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Please, I need shelter. Don't ask me questions. Just don't let them find me." Something in her tone made him pause. This wasn't the plea of a common drifter. This was desperation. He studied her, trying to catch a glimpse beneath the cloth, but she turned away quickly. He could feel the tremble in her shoulders as she leaned on him. Against his better judgment, he lifted her onto his horse and carried her back to the ranch. The storm hit just as they reached his homestead. The wind rattled the shutters and the sky opened up, lightning streaking across the plains. Inside, Elias offered her bread and water. She ate quickly, but never once removed the cloth from her face. Her hands shook as if she expected someone to break through the door at any moment. Elias had seen outlaws, fugitives, and desperate folk before, but something about this woman was different. Her fear wasn't of being caught stealing. It was the fear of someone who had already suffered too much. That night, as the storm howled outside, Elias knew one thing. Whoever this stranger was, her arrival would change everything on his ranch. By morning, the storm had passed, but the tension in the ranch house lingered. Elias sat across the table from the woman as she nibbled at a crust of bread. The cloth still clung tightly to her face, leaving only her eyes visible. Sharp, watchful eyes that darted toward the window whenever a horse whinnied outside. "Got a name?" Elias asked finally. She hesitated before answering. "Clara." "Clara, what?" Her silence told him enough. She wasn't about to give more. Elias leaned back in his chair, scratching his jaw. He wasn't the type to meddle in another person's secrets, but he also wasn't the type to invite trouble onto his land. Still, something in the way she gripped her cup, like it was the only solid thing keeping her upright, kept him from pushing harder. That afternoon, Elias rode into town for supplies. At the saloon, he overheard whispers, rumors of a woman traveling, alone, wrapped in cloth to hide her identity. Some said she was a runaway bride, others swore she was a thief who'd robbed a rancher in Santa Fe. The part that made Elias's stomach tighten was when one of the men mentioned a bounty hunter on her trail. He rode back faster than he had planned. When he reached the ranch, he found Clara mending one of his saddlebags with careful stitches, her hands steady now, her back straight. She didn't look like an outlaw. She looked like someone trying desperately to belong somewhere. Anywhere. Still, Elias couldn't ignore the warnings in town. Trouble had a way of finding ranchers who offered kindness to strangers. Yet, when Clara looked up at him with those guarded eyes, he knew he couldn't turn her out. Not yet. The days passed, and Clara settled into the ranch quietly. She helped with chores, fed the chickens, even hummed soft songs while hanging laundry on the line. Yet she never removed the cloth. At night, Elias often lay awake, listening to the restless sound of her moving in the spare room. Once he heard her whimpering, crying out a man's name in her sleep. Marcus. When he knocked on her door, she pretended she had been awake the whole time, brushing it off. But Elias knew better. Curiosity gnawed at him. He had seen scars. Before. Gunshot wounds, knife marks, cattle branding, gone wrong. Was she hiding something like that? Or was the cloth to disguise her from the men who hunted her? One evening, Clara sat by the fire sewing a torn shirt. The flicker of flames danced across her eyes, and for a moment, Elias thought he saw the outline of burns beneath the cloth. He opened his mouth to ask, but she froze, her hands clutching the fabric tightly. "Please," she whispered, Don't ask me what's under here. Not yet." Elias swallowed his words. There was fear in her voice, but also shame, a deep, heavy shame that weighed on her more than the dangers outside. He wanted to tell her she didn't need to hide, but he knew it wasn't his choice to make. Instead, he nodded and returned to his chair. Still, his thoughts kept circling back to that question. What truth lay hidden behind that cloth? Trouble arrived sooner than Elias expected. 3 bounty hunters rode into town, their horses mean-looking, their faces harder still. They carried rifles slung across their backs and questions on their tongues. "Any word of a woman passin' through?" one asked the saloon barkeep. "Keeps her face covered. The man who wants her back is paying good money." The barkeep shrugged, but others in the saloon leaned in, hungry for gossip. Elias kept to his corner, silent, his hand resting near his holster. By the time he left, word had spread fast. Some said the woman had stolen from her betrothed. Others claimed she was dangerous, even cursed. Elias knew better. He had seen her kindness, her quiet strength. But lies had a way of growing bigger on the frontier. That night, Elias returned home and found Clara pacing. She had heard the riders pass by, and her face, what little he could see of it, was pale with fear. "They'll find me," she whispered. "They always do." Elias set his jaw. He wasn't about to let strangers drag her away without knowing the truth. But he also realized something else. By offering her shelter, he had already chosen sides. And in the Wild West, once sides were chosen, there was no going back. Despite the growing danger, life on the ranch continued. Clara proved herself useful, tending to the cattle and repairing tack. Elias watched as she faced each chore with quiet determination. One morning, she stood her ground against a coyote that had gotten too close to the chicken coop, waving a stick until the beast slunk away. "You've got grit," Elias told her. She almost smiled beneath the cloth. "I had to learn it." That night, as they shared coffee by the fire, Clara allowed herself to speak a little more freely. She told him she once lived near Santa Fe, though her words stopped short when he asked about family. Elias didn't press her. He could feel the weight of her unspoken past, and he knew forcing her would only make her retreat further. Instead, he shared a story from his own youth, of how he had lost his brother in a cattle raid. Clara listened, her eyes softening. It was the first time she reached across the table, resting her hand over his. For Elias, it was a strange, stirring feeling. He had lived alone for so long, the walls of his ranch echoing only with silence. Now, with Clara, there was laughter again, even if brief. Still, every time he looked at the cloth covering her face, his heart ached with both curiosity and dread. What could be so terrible that she hid herself from even the man who had given her shelter? It happened on a night when thunder rolled low over the plains. Clara woke screaming, her voice raw with terror. Elias rushed into her room to find her curled in the corner, clutching the cloth at her face. "Clara," he said gently, kneeling, "it's just a dream." Her eyes were wide, wet with tears. "No, it's a memory." Elias reached out, but she jerked away. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking, "please don't take the cloth off." The pain in her words cut him deeper than any knife. He wanted to comfort her, to show her she didn't need to hide, but the desperation in her plea stopped him cold. He stayed by her side until she calmed, though the distance between them felt greater than ever. That night, Elias sat awake by the fire, torn between respect for her wishes and the burning need to know what haunted her so deeply. The storm outside mirrored the one inside his chest. The truth came sooner than either of them expected. One quiet afternoon, Clara fainted while carrying water from the well. Elias caught her before she hit the ground, her body limp in his arms. As he carried her inside, the cloth slipped slightly. His hands trembled as he set her down, torn between putting it back in place and uncovering the mystery once and for all. Finally, he pulled it away. The sight made him shake violently, not from horror, but from rage and sorrow. Her face, once beautiful, was marred by deep scars running down one side, the skin warped and burned. When Clara woke and saw his expression, tears welled in her eyes. "Now you know," she whispered. "Now you see why I hide." But Elias didn't recoil. Instead, he took her hand, his voice shaking with fury. "Who did this to you?" Clara's confession spilled out like a flood. She had once been promised to a wealthy ranch baron, Marcus Hale, a man twice her age with a cruel reputation. When she refused his hand, he sought to break her. One night he set fire to her family's home. Clara barely escaped, scarred for life, while her parents perished in the flames. "I ran because he said no one would ever want me again," Clara said bitterly, "and for a long time I believed him." Elias listened, his jaw clenched, fury burning in his chest. The thought of a man destroying a woman's life out of greed and pride sickened him. "You're wrong," Elias said firmly. "You're braver than anyone I've ever met. And as long as you're here, he won't touch you again." For the first time, Clara met his gaze fully. Beneath her tears, there was a spark of hope. The bounty hunters returned at dawn, 3 shadows against the rising sun. Elias was ready. He and Clara stood together, rifles in hand, as the men rode onto his land. "This ain't your fight, Boone," one of them called. "Step aside, and no harm done." Elias's answer was a bullet that kicked dust at the hunter's boots. "This is my land, and she's under my roof. That makes it my fight." The standoff erupted into gunfire. The crack of rifles echoed across the plains, smoke rising in the morning light. Clara, steady as stone, fired alongside Elias. When the dust cleared, the bounty hunters lay defeated, their horses scattering. Elias lowered his rifle, chest heaving. Clara stood beside him, her face uncovered now, her scars glowing in the sun like marks of survival. With the bounty hunters gone, Elias knew Marcus Hale would come himself one day. But for now, the ranch was quiet. The danger passed. That evening, Clara stood by the porch, the cloth in her hands. Slowly, she let it fall to the ground. For the first time since he had met her, she showed her face freely, without fear. "Do you still see me?" she asked softly. Elias stepped closer, cupping her scarred cheek in his calloused hand. "I see you, Clara, all of you, and I ain't ever letting you go." The prairie wind swept around them, carrying away the last remnants of her shame. Together they stood watching the sunset, no longer strangers, no longer haunted, just 2, souls bound by scars, strength and love on the untamed frontier.